right. So if folks want to make their way over and have a seat in the nice air condition over here, you can do that. It feels really good, doesn't it? Your shirt is great. Louise, she's the best. So who reads comic books? Anybody? Yeah? This one excited dude reads comic books. It's really great. Comics are a huge, important part of our community and our culture for a lot of reasons. And our guest today has gotten to be sort of the guy behind the pen of some really awesome works. So, Mr. Larry Hama, turn it over to you.
Is it all in my court now?
Nah, I won't leave you hanging.
Okay.
We're good.
Okay.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and then we'll talk about some of your work.
I sold my first cartoon when I was 16, and I was still in high school. I sold it at Castle Frankenstein magazine. This was like 1966. So I've basically been doing this stuff for 50 years, pretty much nonstop. I got involved in underground comics in the late 60s and worked for Gothic Blimp Works, which was published by Von Bodie and edited and art directed by Trina Robbins and Kim Deitch. And the other artists involved in Gothic Blimp Works were R. Crumb, Spain Rodriguez, Art Spiegelman, pretty much everybody who was at the beginning of the underground comics movement in this country. I went to England for a while and worked for an underground publication there called Oz. Then I came back to the States and I drew shoes for Sears Roebuck catalogs. Well, we did all Sears, Montgomery Ward, and J.C. Penney catalogs. We did pretty much every catalog in the country, and I drew the shoes.
Just shoes?
What?
Just shoes?
Just shoes.
Wow,
I was in a room with two other guys, and that's all we did all day was just draw shoes. The guys in the next room, there were these two old guys in there who retouched in all the stitches on brassieres and girdles. And one of them had been doing it for over 40 years, and he still loved his job. You know, it was pretty amazing.
That's some dedication.
Yeah.
Some serious dedication.
All that stuff is gone now, you know, and I've seen a lot of it change. In 1971, I got out of the Army, and I needed a job. And a friend of mine had been drawing comics for Skywald and some other black and white books, and he said, well, look, you know, you can pencil faster than I can, and I can ink faster than you can ink. So let's start a studio together, and we'll double our workload.
That's really smart.
Yeah, so his name was Ralph Reese, and we set up a studio, and I worked with him on lots of jobs for National Lampoon right at the beginning, and for Children's Television Workshop, and we did illustrations for Esquire and Rolling Stone and New York Magazine and lots of other places. And at the same time, we ended up having studio space at Continuity, which was Neil Adams's art studio. And we're actually, you know, we did comics, but comics was sort of a sideline. You know, most of what we did was advertising art and comps and storyboards. And that required us to be drawing pretty much 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. We would get in a storyboard job at 4 o'clock on Thursday, and it was due 9 a.m. on Friday.
I work in advertising and marketing, so I know exactly what you mean.
That's, you never got a job in at 9 o'clock on Monday and said, oh, well, bring it in on Friday.
It's just a testament to how quickly they thought you worked.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
No, but that's where I learned to really do it fast. And so I did that for a while, and Neil got me in the door at DC. He said, well, give this kid a story, an 8-page story, and I'll ink it. And that was my first regular comics job. And then I did some black and white work for Marvel, and then they offered me a monthly Iron Fist book at Marvel. So that was my first monthly book.
What was the first one for DC? The 8-pager. What was that?
It was a 8-page horror story in Sinister House of Secrets.
Nice.
But I did Iron Fist for 5 or 6 issues, and one day I went to Marvel, and an artist named Howie Chaikin was standing outside the downstairs door, and he said, well, why don't you go across the street here to Atlas, and they'll double your rate. And I said, that can't hurt. So, but you have to understand, this was in early 70s, 73 or something like that. And my full pencil rate at Marvel, this is for full pencils, was $23 a page. And it was a big deal when they gave me a $2 raise to a big 25 bucks. And I could barely do a page a day, not even. So on a good week, I was knocking back 125 bucks, which meant that I could have actually done a lot better flipping burgers at, Mickey D's. But it wasn't like having a regular monthly comic book at Marvel.
Yeah, those don't really add up together there. I'd take Marvel over McDonald's any day.
Yeah, but that's what it was during that era. If you wanted to, anybody that wanted to draw comics or do comics wasn't in it to make big bucks, because it was impossible. There were no royalties, and the page rates were low. You had to be able to do it really fast and do a lot of volume. And all that changed when royalties happened, and all that changed when, the sales volumes went up.
Right.
So, I drew comics for years, all the while trying to get writing work, and nobody would ever give me any writing work. I was a full editor at Marvel, editing Crazy magazine, and I still couldn't get any writing work from Marvel. So the editor-in-chief gave me dispensation to work for Warren Comics, and I wrote some martial arts stuff for Eerie and Creepy, and even after that was published, I could show, well, this is what I can do. I can actually write. No editor would give me writing work. They would say, well, you're an artist. We don't want you guys writing. Because if the artists could write their own stuff, what would they need?
That's right.
Writers for? And all the editors were writers. So about 1981, Hasbro decided to bring back G.I. Joe.
Right.
And they had the idea, well, if we had a comic, it would really help sell the toys. So they went and made a deal with Marvel to have Marvel put together the whole package to do a G.I. Joe comic. So Jim Shooter, the editor-in-chief, called every single writer, contract writer at Marvel, to ask them if they want to do it, and they all turned it down. Then he called every non-contract writer, and they all turned it down. Then he started at one end of editorial row at the Marvel offices and went to every editorial office and asked every editor, every assistant editor, every intern, and every kid that went out for coffee, and the mailroom guys, if they wanted to write G.I. Joe, and every single one turned it down, all the way down the row.
No to Joe.
And and I was the last office. I was literally, quite literally, the last person in the known universe that they asked. And I said yes. Because if they had asked me to do Barbie, I would have done Barbie. I just wanted to get some writing work.
Right, right.
No particular interest in doing, a military comic. I'd gotten into the business because I had wanted to do funny animals.
Right. Right. It's a little different.
Right. And at that time, writing a toy license book was considered pariahville. It was considered, the bottom of the barrel, that if you ever did a licensed book, like a toy comic or whatever, you would never be considered a serious contender ever. You would be below the D list. And they were pretty much right. I was never offered an A-list book at Marvel while it was an A-list book. And that's the way it goes. I mean, they only gave me Wolverine when it was about to be canceled. And even after I pushed Wolverine up to the #2 selling book in the country, they said, well, both G.I. Joe and Wolverine, even though they're the #1 and #2 selling books, those are just flukes.
And then we went into the period
you're
called
not
the
really,
Dead Zone.
You're not really a writer. So I took that to heart, and I refuse to call myself a writer. I'm a penciler with a word processor, which is pretty much the way I work. I envision the whole story in my head as a series of images, and then when I sit down to do the script or the plot, I just describe those images. And then I worry about the dialogue later. I don't do thought balloons. I don't do captions. It's just pictures, dialogue, and sound effects. And when I started doing that with G.I. Joe, everybody said, well, you can't do that. Marvel Comics are 50% captions.
That's true.
And I said, yeah, but those stupid captions, all they do is describe what's in the pictures. And half the time, they cover up
the image.
They cover up what they're describing.
Right.
So I just got rid of them. That's pretty much it about me. So if let's open it up to questions.
Who has questions? If you raise your hand, I'll bring you a mic. Oh, super easy. Oh man, you're my favorite person ever.
When you started to do G.I. Joe 21 with the no words, was that hard to get that passed through the editors, or did they just let you do whatever you wanted at that point?
Well, no, that was because an entire issue went missing on the editor's desk or something. So they were short a whole issue. So there was this, slippage into panic mode, and they said, well, how do we, get a whole issue done in 3 weeks? And I said, well, if I write it and draw it at the same time, we save like 3 weeks right there. And if I do it so that there's no words and it's all in pictures, we save another week because it doesn't have to go to the letterer. And then we'll have it colored in-house as we do it and I'll do breakdowns and we'll have finishes done by Steve Leolo. It's really fast. So I sat down and I wrote it and drew it in 3 days. And we sent it out. And it made shipping. And, it wasn't planned out. It was just...
That's the way it went.
Necessity is the mother of invention, and somebody said that before Frank Zappa also. But anyway, but the way I've always written, I say it in quotes, written stories is totally page by page. I do not know what's on page 2 until I get to page 2. I do not know what the end of the story is until I get to the end of the story. Which is why in the 14 years that G.I. Joe was published, there was never a blurb that said, this is what's coming in the next issue. Because the editors never knew what was coming. Because I didn't know what was coming in the next issue. In the silent issue, I got to page 15 or 16, and both Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes had rips in their sleeves during a fight, and I said, well, what can I do with that? Gee, wouldn't it be interesting if they both had the same tattoo? And so, well, what could that tattoo be? And I thought, well, I used this I Ching hexagram in Iron Fist on a character called Lei Kung the Thunderer, and it was a hexagram I could remember because it was alternating broken and solid lines. So I chose that. I stuck it on both their forearms. Had no idea what it meant or how they got there or how they knew each other. I had to make that up 5 issues later in number 26. And I didn't really know then. I started on the first page and then figured it out page by page. Did that answer your question? Okay.
How much say-so or advice, or did you get any interference from Hasbro on your storylines?
Hasbro never told me a thing about what to do. I mean, the first year, here was the trick. In the first year, Hasbro commissioned and paid for 4 animated commercials for G.I. Joe. And they were done before the comics. Basically, the only reason the comics existed was to justify the existence of these commercials. Because at that time, you could not have a commercial for a toy on TV that had more than 7.5 seconds of animation in it, right? The majority of the commercial, you had to have live footage of the actual crappy toy.
Right.
you couldn't, fool the kids by having this really jazzy, completely animated commercial, right? Which made sense, right? And the entire toy industry had been like brainstorming for years to try to figure out how to get around this. And one genius at Hasbro one day said, First Amendment. If it's a publication, you can't restrict the advertising on it. First Amendment of the Constitution. So if we had a comic book that happened to have all the toys that we wanted to advertise, we could commission a full 60-second slam bang animated commercial that was violent as heck and just non-stop action, and it's perfectly legal. So that was my only restriction at Hasbro, is that, you know, they would have these there were 4 issues out of that year that they already had commercials for, and I had to somehow have every image that was in that commercial in the comic book, right? Which is how I ended up doing a book that had, you know, a windsurfing surfboard and a snowmobile in the same issue. So, what can I say?
You work with what you got. Sure. Let's see, this will be fun.
Between a toy company, a comic book company, and yourself, who owns the rights to all your storylines? Do you have legal issues there with who owns the rights and who gets to use them?
Hasbro owns the rights to everything. Okay, Hasbro owns the rights to not just the toys, but all the comics. So that when somebody licenses G.I. Joe as a comic, or anything that Hasbro has as a comic, you're buying the whole package. And you can reprint everything that was ever done, which is why, you know, IDW can reprint all the Marvel stuff, all the Devil's Due stuff, and all of that. Each of these companies is just reprocessing. You know, if IDW lost the license and, you know, Potato Salad Comics got the license next year, Potato Salad Comics could reprint the entire IDW run, and nobody at IDW would get a cent. That's how it works. You know, that's why certain lawyers get paid lots of money.
It doesn't seem very fair, but that is how it works.
Well, nothing is fair.
No, I was going to say Hasbro owns the universe too, so they seem to own just about everything. Questions? Anyone else have a question? Oh, yeah, come on.
Did you ever write about any of your experiences in the military in G.I. Joe?
No, because you know, it's not. That's not what G.I. Joe is really about. You know, I never thought of G.I. Joe as per se as a military comic. I thought of it more as the junior woodchucks with guns. The core fantasy is really about camaraderie and loyalty, rather than about tactics or even flag waving. There's very little jingoism in there. There's you know, it's told from the grunt's point of view. It's told from an enlisted man's point of view. You know, it's about how the guys in the field feel about each other and support each other, and that's the important fantasy. It's a fantasy I think that a lot of kids could identify with or like, because the whole idea of loyal friends is really what it's about. You know, I think it's the same thing that makes Harry Potter work. You know, people say, "Oh, Harry Potter, it's about magic," you know, and it's not about magic. It's about that fantasy of being in this wonderful place with these, you know, with these friends with
your friends, right?
Yeah, friends who are, you know, loyal and you know, every kid knows how much of a fantasy loyalty is. And, you know, to have a friend that won't betray you or you know, won't sell you out or, you know, won't turn their back on you or whatever is pretty amazing. And, you know, it's a fantasy world where things get bad, but things work themselves out. And it's very comforting.
Sure, here we go.
Hello. One of my favorite works of yours is the Nth Man from the late 80s. I was just curious if there would ever be a collected edition, or if you might ever return to that universe in some fashion in the future that you know of.
I'm sorry?
Will you ever do more Nth Man comics, or maybe come out with a collection?
Well, you know, Marvel owns Nth Man completely, you know, so it's I don't think they even remember it exists, you know. The problem with Nth Man was it was outside the Marvel universe, and, you know, the unified Marvel universe where, you know, every single character, you know, knows every other character, or is, you know, gone out with their ex-girlfriend, or, you know, whatever. You know, that's the main selling point of Marvel these days, and it's so strong that DC got on the bandwagon, and even Hasbro has jumped on it. And everybody, you know, every company that has a universe or a multitude of characters is going, wow, let's, you know, make them all know each other. You know?
Let's team them up. They're all best friends.
Right, you know, we could, you know, that have these, you know, giant conglomerates where, you know, whereas you've had people that liked this guy or that guy or this girl or whatever, you know, you could get them all combined into a single audience, you know, and that was the problem with Nth Man. It didn't click into the universe. Although they did try to integrate him into the universe about 4 or 5 times, and having him, you know, show up as a character in other places. But that sort of worked as well as putting the Punisher in the Nam. You know, it was like something not quite right there. Anybody else?
Sure, come over here.
What was it like restarting the series at 155 and a half after such? What was it like restarting the series at 155 and a half after a several years break?
Like the break never happened. You know, I mean, you have to understand that most of the characters are sort of based on people I know. You know, it was the only. I knew that if I had to do a series with tons of characters and I had to keep making them up, that there was no way to keep track of them. You know, that's how I started doing the file cards. I didn't do that for Hasbro originally. I did that for myself so that I could keep track of who the characters were. And then Hasbro saw the file cards and said, oh, we should put these on the backs of the packages. But I figured out that the best way to keep characters consistent was to base them on actual people, the people I knew, so that, you know, they don't waver off course. You know, if you know, if I base a characterization on, you know, my cousin Randy, you know, I know that I put him into a situation in a story, and I go, oh wait, he wouldn't do that. So I've got a model to look at to compare it. I see in a lot of other comics, every new writer that comes on just changes the character, and you just sort of lose that. There are characters out there that nobody can seem to like alter in any way. It's very hard to like mess with the core of Spider-Man or Iron Man or Conan or even Batman. But other characters that aren't that strongly established, they just like start to waver and get really inconsistent. And when they veer completely off course, you just don't care anymore. So I think that's the whole secret about it is making the characters consistent over a long period of time. And characters in a long-going continuity, you get to know them just like you know real people. You get to know them in increments. People who read Peanuts for the entire run, you would see a character that would say like 3 lines in a strip, a sentence or 2 every day. But you got those little increments every day for years, and they built up, in your mind to this whole catalog. I used to ask when I was an editor, I would tell my writers, well, why are you so interested in the plot? I don't care about the plot. Plot is just there to hang interesting characters on. And I would give the Peanuts example. I'd say like, look, how long you been reading Peanuts? I've been reading Peanuts all my life. Well, tell me exactly what happens in one Sunday strip. Tell me the plot. The closest I ever got was, well, Lucy's got the football and she pulls it away when Charlie Brown. Yeah, but what was the gag? Nobody can remember, But if I said, okay, you sit down here with this piece of paper, you write me a 1-page psychological profile of Lucy Van Pelt or Linus, you can do that because you know those people. You've hung out with them. You've lived your life with these characters, And if somebody else came along and did those characters and had them do something out of character, you'd know it right away. That's all I'm saying. I'm sorry, I think I veered off course on that.
Got time for one more.
Okay, so this is a 2-part question. Which character are you the proudest of, that you find the most interesting? And which character do you think they butchered the most in the live-action G.I. Joe movies?
Which character would be the what?
Which character are you most proud of, and which character do you think they butchered the most in the live-action G.I. Joe movies? We might be here a while on that last one.
Well, there are a bunch of characters that I really like, obviously. I mean, Snake Eyes, Nth Man, Bucky O'Hare. Those are the 3 that I have the most invested in.
I love Bucky O'Hare. I love that character.
I think they really messed up a lot of characters in the G.I. Joe movie. The list is too long. I mean, they hired me as a technical consultant on the first one, and I read the first 3 drafts of the scripts, and I decided I had to trim down my, fight a small battle. and concentrate on one thing and forget about everything else. And the one thing I concentrated on was I kept telling them every day, Snake Eyes can't talk. The first version of the script, they had him talking in the last scene. And I was like sort of shocked. I said, wait a second. You can't have this character talking because it's not like he took a vow of silence, he just can't talk. And they said, yeah, but isn't that great? I mean, here you have this character who can't talk, and in the last scene, he talks. See, this is movie executive logic. You know, it's hard to beat that, even though everybody was telling them, no, I think that's a bad idea. And they actually shot the scene. And when they sat down and actually saw it in the dailies, that's when they said, no, I don't think this works. So I sort of won that one. So is that a wrap?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Let's give it up for Mr. Hama. Round of applause. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.